The lights in the Ouagadougou studio burned bright, casting every face in stark relief. The audience was packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with anticipation. On one side of the simple wooden desk sat a journalist, papers shuffled with meticulous precision, a smirk tugging at his lips. On the other, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, military uniform crisp, eyes calm, unwavering, exuding a quiet power. The tension was palpable, like the charged silence before a storm hits. This wasn't just an interview, it was a trap. And everyone in the room knew it but Traoré. He was ready. Are you ready to see what happened next? The journalist leaned forward, voice smooth, rehearsed, each word a calculated strike. Captain, you claim to fight for justice, for sovereignty, for the people of Burkina Faso. But how can anyone trust you when you seized power by force, when you overthrew the government, when you broke the very laws you now claim to uphold? The silence that followed cut through the studio like a knife. You could feel the audience holding their breath. Would Traoré crack? Would anger finally betray him? Stay with me, because the response shocked everyone. Traoré's face remained serene, not a flicker of fear, not a twitch of irritation. He nodded once, calm as a still lake, and then spoke. That is a fair question. Thank you for asking it. The journalist blinked, momentarily disarmed. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect. Traoré continued, voice steady, deliberate. Trust is not demanded. Trust is earned, and let me ask you, where was the trust when children went hungry, when mothers lost their sons to preventable diseases, when foreign powers drained our wealth while leaders looked the other way? Even as he spoke, you could sense the narrative shifting. This wasn't politics, this was accountability. Do you think he just turned the tables, or was there more coming? As the journalist tried to interject, Traoré raised a hand, not aggressively, but with quiet authority. Let me finish. You speak of laws. I respect laws, but I respect life more. There is a higher law, a law that says no child should starve while politicians feast. No mother should watch her baby die while foreign companies take our wealth. That is the law I answer to. The studio fell silent. Heads nodded, eyes glistened, some faces full of tears, and in that silence the first crack appeared in the journalist's composure. Could the trap he set withstand this level of humanity? The journalist pressed harder, sharper now, trying to corner Traoré on frozen bank accounts, expelled diplomats, and controversial alliances. But Traoré didn't flinch. You call it isolation, I call it independence. You call it reckless, I call it courage. What is truly reckless is allowing our people to be treated as slaves in their own land while foreign powers profit. He leaned forward, voice rising slightly, eyes burning with intensity. I walk through villages where children go to bed hungry, mothers lose their sons, and trucks full of gold pass by. What should I have done? Watched quietly, pretended laws mattered more than lives. The audience leaned in, hanging on every word. Could it get any more intense? And then, the moment nobody expected. Traoré stood slowly, deliberately, and walked past the desk. Not toward confrontation, but toward the audience. Gasps filled the room. Cameras shook, capturing raw, unscripted reality. He stopped in front of an elderly woman, kneeling beside her. "Mama," he said softly, taking her hand. "Why are you crying?" Her voice trembled. "My son. He was killed by terrorists. He was only 19. Traoré's eyes glistened as he repeated her son's name, Musa, committing it to memory. "I promise you, Musa and every child lost will not be forgotten," he said. The studio held its breath. Even the journalist seemed paralyzed. Was this a moment of real leadership, or something beyond it? He stood, but didn't let go immediately, pressing a respectful kiss to her forehead. Then he turned to the cameras, voice resonant. "Look at me. I am not a politician. I am a soldier, a son of Burkina Faso. I took power because I could no longer ignore the suffering of my people, and if that makes me guilty, I accept it. But I will never apologize for choosing life over procedure, people over protocol." The audience erupted, standing ovations, tears, cries, applause crashing over the studio. Social media would be ablaze within hours. Would the world understand what they just witnessed? By the end, Traoré had transformed the interview from a political ambush into a movement of empathy and accountability. Citizens shared the clip across continents. Young people reconsidered leaving the country. Activists cited his words. Even skeptics had to pause. One moment, a military captain; the next, a human being embodying courage, compassion, and leadership that defied expectations. That day, leadership itself was redefined, and you, watching this unfold, had witnessed a revolution of humanity in real time. The studio lights blazed down on Ouagadougou, but it wasn't the glare that caught your attention. It was the weight of every story in that room. Faces in the audience carried decades of struggle, fear, and resilience. Among them sat an elderly woman, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes clouded with grief. 3 years ago, terrorists had taken her son, Musa, and nothing since had filled the emptiness he left behind. Today she didn't know that her story would define the narrative of an entire nation. You'll see why this moment changed everything. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat across from the journalist, calm, composed, but his gaze never left the faces in the audience. He wasn't here to parry questions with political jargon. He came to confront reality, to speak for the unseen, the unheard, the broken. The journalist opened with the usual probes, digging for a misstep, ready to highlight controversies, alliances, and decisions that critics called reckless. But Traoré reframed the discussion from the first word. "I answer not as a politician," he said, "but as someone who has walked through villages where children sleep hungry and mothers bury their sons. If we speak only of protocols and power, we ignore the lives that depend on action." The audience leaned in. Do you think a military leader could truly connect this way? Stay tuned, because the next move stunned everyone. The questions grew sharper. Why freeze bank accounts? Why expel diplomats? Why form alliances with nations others call dubious? Traoré didn't flinch. He spoke softly, deliberately, painting pictures of ordinary life. Money frozen in banks belonged to teachers who hadn't been paid in months, to nurses working without medicine, to farmers who couldn't afford seeds. Yes, some call it drastic. I call it responsibility. You want to know why? Because these people are the backbone of our nation. Their children's future is not negotiable. Murmurs rippled through the studio. Some faces were nodding, others, skeptical, shifted uneasily. But the momentum was building. Can leadership be measured in empathy rather than policy? You'll see how he proves it. Then came the journalist's last volley: Russia, strategic partnerships, and global criticism. A moment designed to strip him of credibility, to force him into defensiveness. Traoré closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, then opened them with a clarity that seemed to cut through the tension like a blade. When your house is on fire, you do not ask the water bearer's politics or background. You take the water and put out the flames. Our nation has been burning for decades. And if some now judge the alliances we forge, I ask, where were they when our children were being killed? The room held its breath. Even the journalist, armed with statistics and prepared attacks, faltered. Could empathy rewrite the narrative of power? And then it happened. The moment the world would replay for years. Traoré stood, moving past the desk, past the cameras, into the heart of the audience. The studio gasped. Cameras wobbled, capturing unscripted reality. He knelt before the elderly woman, placing his hands gently over hers. "Mama," he said softly, "why are you crying?" Her voice cracked. "My son, Musa, he was killed by terrorists." Traoré repeated the name, committing it to memory. "I promise you, Musa and every child lost will not be forgotten. Every decision I make carries their names with it." The audience sat stunned, some in tears, some in silence. All changed. Can leadership be measured in human connection? He rose, but not abruptly. Respect lingered in his gesture, a gentle kiss to her forehead, a silent vow. Then he turned to the cameras, his voice carrying conviction that transcended politics. "I am not a politician. I am a soldier, but more than that, I am a son of Burkina Faso. My choices, my actions are guided by the people who have been ignored for too long. If that makes me controversial, so be it, but I will never apologize for putting life over procedure, for putting people over protocol." Social media erupted within hours. Hashtags spread across Africa, videos went viral, discussions ignited in homes, cafes, and classrooms. Could one act of humanization spark a national conversation? Absolutely. By the end, the interview had become a movement. Families discussed leadership through the lens of empathy. Young people reconsidered leaving the country. Critics had to pause, even if begrudgingly. Ibrahim Traoré had done what no one expected. He transformed power into accountability, politics into compassion, authority into a mirror of the people's struggle. That day, leadership was not measured in speeches or lawbooks, but in kneeling before a mother, naming her son, and vowing to carry her loss as his responsibility. And that, viewers across Africa realized, was revolutionary. The moment Ibrahim Traoré knelt before the grieving mother in that television studio didn't just shock the audience. It ignited a wildfire across the continent. Within minutes, clips appeared online, shared by viewers who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Hashtags surged, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all ablaze with the raw humanity of a military leader defying expectations. You'll see why this wasn't just an interview, it was a movement. In villages across Burkina Faso, small groups huddled around cracked smartphone screens, watching the interview on shaky internet connections. Young men who had been planning dangerous migration routes to Europe paused. "Maybe things can change," whispered Amadou, a 23-year-old from the north, as his friends watched intently. For the first time in years, hope felt tangible. Could one man's empathy spark a national reawakening? Comment below. Do you think leaders can really inspire change this way? In the capital, Ouagadougou, university students replayed the footage in dorm rooms, dissecting every word, every gesture. Social media exploded with debates. Was Traoré reckless or courageous? Controversial or visionary, ordinary citizens joined the conversation, sharing stories of lost family members, of corruption endured, of resilience overlooked. The interview had cracked open a space for truth, for accountability, for raw dialogue. Some critics scoffed, but the youth were enthralled. Is this the start of Africa's next generation of activists? Stay tuned, because the next wave of reaction would be unstoppable. Media outlets scrambled. Western newspapers and TV channels tried to frame the narrative, some labeling Traoré as a volatile coup leader, others questioning his alliances. Yet, no analysis could fully capture the emotional gravity he had delivered live to millions. Analysts in Europe and Asia debated endlessly about the long-term implications, unaware that for the citizens of Burkina Faso, this was not politics. It was personal. Conversations in homes, cafes, and marketplaces carried the same sentiment: a leader who actually listens, who actually cares. Do you think the world will understand this perspective or dismiss it? Across neighboring Mali, Niger, and Guinea, clips circulated rapidly. Young activists, previously cynical and disengaged, saw a model of leadership they had almost stopped believing existed. Traoré's words, "I take responsibility when others abandoned it," resonated like a drumbeat across the region. They debated strategies, inspired to act, to demand accountability, and to hold power to the human standards set in that studio. Could this moment catalyze a regional shift in how citizens view governance? Drop your take below, because the next developments would surprise everyone. But the impact wasn't limited to inspiration. Within days, tangible reforms began rolling out. Schools that had been neglected for years received funding. Clinics reopened with essential medicine. Agricultural programs reached villages previously ignored by bureaucrats. Anti-corruption initiatives accelerated as stolen funds were recovered and redistributed transparently. Traoré had moved from symbolic gestures to concrete action. The nation was watching, learning, and, most importantly, believing that change was possible. How far could these reforms go before the old powers push back? Even critics, the cynics who had anticipated scandal, had to pause. The raw humanity displayed, the act of kneeling before a citizen, the acknowledgement of grief and loss, could not be ignored. Commentators admitted, begrudgingly, that Traoré's courage was undeniable, his leadership style unprecedented. This was not just a coup leader asserting power. This was a leader redefining what accountability, empathy, and sovereignty could look like. Could this change the narrative for all African leadership? The whispers from Ouagadougou suggested yes. The interview became a reference point. Activists cited it in campaigns. Teachers played it in classrooms. Citizens shared it repeatedly, using it to spark conversations about justice, corruption, and civic responsibility. Across the country, the hashtag dedicated to Musa, the young boy whose story had humanized Traoré, became a symbol of collective memory, a reminder that governance must serve life, not protocol. Social media debates transformed into real-world demands for change. Will this ripple effect endure beyond a viral moment? Only time will tell. Months later, historians, journalists, and citizens would reflect on that viral day. They would analyze policies, question alliances, and scrutinize decisions. But they could not erase the image of a leader kneeling in humility, naming the dead, and promising accountability. For a generation that had grown cynical about governance, Traoré had delivered a lesson in courage, empathy, and real leadership. That single moment, shared, liked, and debated across the globe, proved that power need not corrupt, and that one person's humanity could inspire millions. Are you ready to see leaders like this again? Because this story was just the beginning.